She couldn't hear the laughter, but she could feel it. Every vibration in the floorboards, every sneer on every face, every open mouth forming words she had learned long ago not to bother reading. Because whatever they said about Nora Vane never changed. It never softened. It only ever drew more of the same crowd. Cripple Creek, Colorado, January 1874. The mining boom had turned this valley into a city of men, rough, loud, hungry men who had come for silver and stayed for whatever else they could take. On this particular Tuesday morning, the auction block stood outside the Meridian Saloon, a platform of raw pine planks hammered together for occasions exactly like this one. Sheriff Dale Rourke climbed up first, thumbs hooked behind his belt buckle, the silver star on his chest catching the flat winter light. He was a large man who had never once been told no. Not by a judge, not by a reverend, not by any woman in this county. He turned to the small figure standing behind him. She was 26, deaf since a fever took her hearing at age 9. Plain dress, dark wool, both hands folded in front of her like she was praying or bracing. Her father, Emmett Vane, stood at the edge of the platform with his hat in his hands and a bill of sale already signed in his coat pocket. He had debts. She was the collateral. "Gentlemen," Rourke boomed, his voice carrying to the crowd of miners packed 3 deep into the muddy street. "What we have here is a healthy woman, strong back, quiet disposition." He let the pause land like a fist. "Permanently quiet, if you catch my meaning." The crowd roared. Nora saw their mouths open. She understood. She did not look away. She looked straight ahead, jaw set, eyes dry. She had survived 17 years of that sound, that specific convulsion of human cruelty that people call humor when they are aiming it at someone who cannot fight back. She was not going to give them tears today. Then, at the back of the crowd, a shadow moved. A man stepped out from the gap between 2 wagons. He was tall, too tall, coat dark with road dust and old blood, a face that had been broken and set wrong at least twice. He carried no rifle, no pistol in sight, just 2 hands the size of coal shovels and eyes that had seen the interior of a war and come back with something missing. He walked forward through the crowd, and the crowd somehow moved aside. Where in the world are you listening to this story right now? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this voice is traveling. Her name was Nora Vane. She was the second daughter of Emmett Vane, a man who had once been a decent farmer in Ohio before debt and drought and 2 bad winters turned him into something else entirely. They had come west in 1869 with a wagon, a mule, and the kind of optimism that frontier advertising companies had learned to sell for the price of a pamphlet. Emmett had staked a claim outside Cripple Creek on land that turned out to be rock all the way down. He borrowed money to drill deeper. The silver didn't come. The debt did. By the time Emmett Vane sat down with Sheriff Dale Rourke in the back room of the Meridian Saloon, he had been awake for 40 hours straight and had exactly $3 to his name. In the winter of 1874, in the Colorado foothills, arrangements like the one Emmett Vane made were not unusual. Records from Pueblo County from that period include no fewer than 47 transactions filed under domestic labor contracts that were, by any honest reading, the sale of women to satisfy male debts. The law did not call it what it was. The law rarely did. Rourke had wanted Nora for 2 years. He had made that clear every time he came to collect the debt payment that never came. He was not a man who waited without intent. Nora knew. She had always known. She had learned to read the specific quality of a man's stillness, the kind that is not patience, but calculation. Rourke had that stillness every time he looked at her. What Nora also had, though no one in Cripple Creek seemed to notice, was a mind of startling precision. She read everything she could get her hands on. She had taught herself to lip-read 3 languages. She sketched detailed maps of the valley floor in the margins of her father's account books, having noticed, years before any survey came through, that the creek shifted southwest every spring and was slowly undermining the eastern claim walls. She had told her father. He had not listened. She had written it down. He had used the paper to light his pipe. This is the thing about silenced people that the crowd outside the meridian could not see. Silence does not mean empty. It means contained. The cruelest part was not the auction itself. It was the line of women standing at the edge of that crowd, women who had once stood where Nora stood, who had been through what Nora was about to go through, and not one of them made a sound. The man who moved through the crowd now had no name that anyone in Cripple Creek knew. He had arrived 3 days earlier and paid for a room at Kessler's boarding house in hard coin without a word. Mrs. Kessler had told her neighbor that he ate alone, slept in his boots, and left his door unlocked. His name was August Carr, former corporal, 5th Infantry, Army of the Potomac. He had fought at Spotsylvania, Cold Harbor, and Petersburg. He had survived all 3 engagements and the 12 years of silence that came after. He had come to Cripple Creek following a letter from a dead man, a former bunkmate who had written 3 weeks before dying of a chest wound in New Mexico that there was land near the creek worth buying cheap. August had not come looking for a fight, but he had a specific reaction to certain sounds. A particular frequency of human cruelty, the sound of a crowd enjoying someone else's suffering, hit him somewhere behind his sternum like a rifle report. He had stood at the back of the crowd for 40 seconds. He had watched the sheriff's mouth moving. He had watched the woman on the platform, the way she held herself like a person who had practiced being a wall. 40 seconds was all it took. Ask yourself this. It is easy to look away when the danger is not pointed at you. But is the looking away truly neutral? Or does silence in a moment like that become its own kind of choice? August Carr walked to the base of the auction platform and stopped. He did not raise his voice. He did not draw a weapon. He reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet, opened it, and laid 3 items on the edge of the platform with the deliberate care of a man laying down cards in a game he intends to win. A land deed, a discharged soldier's identification paper, a folded letter from a territorial surveyor in Denver, dated November 1873, assessing a parcel of 120 acres on the western ridge of the Cripple Creek Valley at a value of $900. "I'll pay the debt," August said. "The full amount. Whatever else Rourke is owed on top of it. Name your number." Rourke stared down from the platform. His jaw worked slowly. "You don't even know the woman." "That's right," August said. He did not look at Rourke again. He looked at the documents on the platform edge. "What's the number?" The number was $240. August paid it in gold coin from a worn canvas bag. He counted it onto the plank in stacks of 20, each stack set down without hurry, the way a man counts something he has already decided to part with. When the last coin was placed, August stepped back. He turned to Nora. She was already watching him. She had been watching him from the moment he approached, not with hope, but with the careful attention of someone who has learned that rescues often come with conditions. She was reading his face, his hands, the set of his shoulders. He met her eyes. He did not smile. He did not hold out his hand. He simply tilted his head toward the street. "Come on, if you want." Nora stepped off the platform. The road north out of Cripple Creek followed the western bank of 4 Mile Creek before climbing toward the high ridge through a dense corridor of Engelmann spruce. In January, the trail was barely a trail, more a suggestion of direction pressed into 2 feet of snow by the occasional mule team. August drove the wagon. Nora sat beside him, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled of pine, resin, and horses. Neither of them spoke, one by habit, one by biology, and both, perhaps, by a shared and private recognition that there was nothing useful to say yet. The silence was not awkward. This surprised Nora. She had lived her whole life in the silence of other people's discomfort. The strained smiling, the over-enunciated mouths, the exhausting theater of people trying to talk at her. August made no theater. He drove. He watched the trail. Every half hour or so he checked the sky behind them with the practiced eye of a man who knows what a closing storm looks like. 3 hours out of town, the temperature dropped 15 degrees in 20 minutes. August pulled the wagon under the overhang of a granite shelf on the eastern ridge of the San Juan foothills. Without ceremony, he produced a second blanket from behind the bench, heavier than the first, lined with rabbit fur. He held it out. Nora took it. She watched him climb down into knee-deep snow, cut 2 young pines with 7 efficient axe strokes, and build a windbreak on the open side of the overhang in under 10 minutes. He moved like someone who had done this so many times the motion had gone below thought, into the body. He melted snow in a tin pot over a small fire, made coffee, handed her a cup. It was the specific heat of the cup in her hands, the weight of it, the warmth spreading from the tin into her palms. That was the first thing. The first small, ordinary thing that did not feel like a transaction. She drank the coffee. He drank his. The snow fell on the other side of the windbreak in long, quiet sheets. After a while, Nora pulled out the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket. She wrote a single sentence and held it up for him to read. "Why?" August read it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached over, took the pencil gently from her fingers, and wrote beneath her word, "Because no one should be sold." He handed it back. He looked back at the fire. Nora looked at the words in her own notebook in a stranger's handwriting, and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. The sensation of being seen. The cabin sat at 9,200 feet on a south-facing bench cut into the ridge, sheltered from the north wind by a wall of old-growth spruce that August's dead bunkmate, a man named Cord Halverson, had planted as seedlings in 1861. The trees were now 30 feet tall and stood like a dark curtain against the sky. The cabin itself was sound. Hand-hewn Douglas fir, a stone chimney that drew cleanly, a plank floor laid over a root cellar that stayed 38 degrees even in the worst of winter. 2 small windows faced south, fitted with scraped hide stretched tight enough to let light through. A cast-iron stove dominated the eastern wall. Against the north wall, a plank bed with a rope spring frame. August had slept there for 3 nights before going down to Cripple Creek. He had spent those nights reading Cord's journals and making lists. Now there were 2 of them. He gave her the bed. He laid his bedroll beside the stove without discussion. The first morning, Nora woke to find a fire already burning, coffee on, and a pair of wool socks, clean, thick, clearly unused, sitting on the foot of the bed. She put them on. They were 4 sizes too large. She walked to the stove and poured her coffee, and stood at the south-facing window watching the light come over the ridge. Behind her, August was at the table with Cord's ledger books and a pencil, working through numbers that had something to do with the spring survey she had glimpsed in the documents he laid on the auction platform. He did not look up, but he had set a second cup. There is a particular kind of silence that forms between two people who have both been broken. Not empty, but full, the way an old barn holds all the winters it has survived inside its beams. You can feel the weight of it, and somehow the weight is a comfort. The days organized themselves without negotiation. August went out before light to check trap lines along the upper draw and the creek below the ridge. He came back by mid-morning. Nora had learned the stove's moods by the 3rd day, the way it needed feeding every 2 hours in the deep cold, the way the damper had to stay at 3/4 or the chimney smoked. She learned to bank the coals before dawn so there were embers to build from rather than starting cold each morning. She cooked from the stores August had laid in: salt pork, dried beans, flour, 2 crocks of bear fat rendered the previous fall. She found wild rose hips frozen under the snow at the south edge of the spruce wall and made tea from them that tasted, against all reasonable expectation, like something intentional and warm. August tasted it at supper. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. He nodded once. Nora understood that this was, from him, extravagance. In frontier households of the 1870s, a wood-burning stove consumed nearly a cord of firewood each week through the deep cold of a Rocky Mountain winter. The difference between comfort and catastrophe was measured in how many hours before dark a household had its wood split and stacked. August had 3 weeks' worth of rounds cut and waiting in the lean-to, but he needed them split. On the 4th day, without asking permission or announcing intention, Nora picked up the splitting maul. She had never split wood in her life. She missed the round completely on the first 3 swings. Then she adjusted her grip, found the weight of the head, learned to let the tool fall rather than force it. By noon, she had worked through half a cord, her shoulders burning, her breath coming in hard white clouds. August came back from the trap lines and found her at the splitting block. He stood at the tree line for a moment, watching. Then he came forward and, without interrupting her swing, repositioned her right hand 2 inches down the handle. A single correction, delivered through touch, wordless and precise. The next log split clean. I believe the most intimate act between 2 strangers is not a touch. It is the moment one of them stops flinching. At night, by the stove light, August read. He had Cord's journals and a battered copy of Thoreau's Walden, with so many pages dog-eared that the binding had cracked. Nora sat across from him with her notebook, sketching the view from the south window, the ridge line, the shapes of the spruce at various hours, the way snow loaded the branches differently in wet cold versus dry cold. One evening, she turned the notebook toward him and showed him what she had drawn. A detailed topographic sketch of the valley below, the creek's actual current line marked in red pencil, diverging from the surveyed line by nearly 200 yards. August leaned forward. He studied the drawing for a long time. He got up and retrieved Cord's survey documents from the chest by the door. He spread them on the table. He compared. She was right. The creek had moved since the survey was filed. He looked at her across the table, a different look than before. Not gratitude exactly, not surprise exactly, but a calibration, a reassessment of what was sitting across from him. Nora held his gaze. She was accustomed to being reassessed. What she was not accustomed to was the specific thing that happened next. He turned the survey map toward her, set a pencil beside it, and sat back in his chair. "Show me," his posture said. "All of it." She showed him. They worked at that table until the fire burned low, the survey spread between them, her red pencil moving through the old markings, his finger tracing the land features she indicated. An entire conversation conducted in maps and margins and the particular fluency of two people who had both spent years learning to communicate around the edges of what other people assumed about them. Outside, the wind threw itself against the spruce wall and found nothing to break through. Inside, the fire ticked. At some point, she could not have said exactly when, the word stranger stopped being the right word. It was the survey that brought the trouble. Nora's correction of the creek line had revealed something neither she nor August had yet named aloud, though both had begun to understand it separately in the particular way that intelligent people arrive at bad news. The cabin's 120-acre parcel didn't just sit on a ridge with a good view. It sat on top of the largest undocumented silver-bearing formation in Teller County. The topographic anomaly Nora had identified, the creek shift, the specific sediment deposit pattern she had sketched from the south window over 3 weeks of observation, matched precisely the geological signature that Cord Halverson had been hunting for 11 years. It was written in his journals, page after page of survey notes and mineral assays and carefully cross-referenced creek observations, all pointing to the same location, the bench beneath the cabin. Cord had known, and Cord had been dead for 6 weeks before August arrived. The question August had not yet answered, working through those journals by stove light at night, was this: how did Cord die? And who else had read these journals before August? The answer arrived on the 11th day of February in the form of 2 riders coming up the ridge trail in a hard snowstorm. Nora saw them first. She had been at the south window with her sketchbook when the movement of the tree line registered. 2 shapes, too deliberate, too slow for the weather. She crossed the room and put her hand flat on the table in front of August. He looked up. She pointed at the window. August was at the door in 3 strides. The riders were employed by a man named Cornelius Fitch, regional director of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad, which had been acquiring mineral rights in Teller County since 1871. Fitch was not a man who appeared in person. He sent lawyers, surveyors, and, when those failed, men like these. Their names were Tolbert and Crane. Both had the specific quality of men who had been hired for their capacity for patience and their lack of objection to cold work. They carried a document claiming that the cabin's land deed, the deed August had produced at the auction, the deed originating with Cord Halverson, contained a subordinate mineral rights clause that transferred all subsurface extraction rights to the Denver and Rio Grande upon Halverson's death, in satisfaction of a railroad stock loan signed in 1869. August read the document twice. He looked at the clause in question. He handed it to Nora. She read it. She read it again. Then she went to the chest by the door and pulled out Cord's journals, the 3rd one, the one from 1869. She found the page in under a minute, running her finger down the margin notes with the efficiency of someone who had already been through these books systematically. She set the journal open on the table beside the document, pointed. August looked. The railroad stock loan in the document was dated March 3, 1869. Cord's journal entry for March 3, 1869, recorded clearly that Halverson had been in Cheyenne, Wyoming, 300 miles north, delivering a mule team. The entry included the name of the man who paid for the mules a bill of sale, and the notation, "Did not return to Creek until the 19th." The document was a forgery. Sheriff Dale Rourke had not come to Cripple Creek by accident. He had come because Cornelius Fitch needed a legal instrument to take the land, and Dale Rourke had always been available to those who paid for availability. The auction, Nora's father's debt, the whole public theater of it, had been a secondary objective. Get the woman who had been living on that ridge with old Halverson. Find out what she knew. Nora had not been living on the ridge. She had never met Cord Halverson. But someone had told Fitch otherwise. We all believe we are capable of standing firm, until the storm comes for something we didn't know we needed. If you had to choose between the safety of abandoning what is right and the danger of defending it, which path would you walk? August folded the document. He set it in the stove. He watched it burn. "We'll need a lawyer in Denver," he said, "and we'll need to move fast." He turned. Nora was already at the table. She had Cord's journals lined up in order of date, the relevant entries marked with strips of torn paper. Her sketchbook was open to a clean page. She was already writing a summary, organized, numbered, each forged element cross-referenced to Cord's contemporaneous record. August looked at the work in front of her. He sat down across from her and picked up a pencil. They worked through the night. Rourke came himself on the 23rd of February. He did not come with Tolbert and Crane. He came alone, which was either arrogance or calculation. The belief that one man in a sheriff's star, arriving at a small cabin on a high ridge in hard weather, carried more legal weight than two hired guns who had already failed. He knocked. He was not the kind of man who waited long. August opened the door. Rourke looked at him. Then he looked past him at Nora, who stood at the table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on the sheriff's face, reading every word. "I have a writ," Rourke said. He held up the paper. "Signed by Judge Crenshaw in Colorado Springs. Vacate the premises within 72 hours, or I remove you by force." August took the writ. He read it. "Judge Crenshaw's jurisdiction ends at the county line," August said. "This parcel is in Park County. You know that." "Boundaries shift," Rourke said. "So does the creek," August said. "Funny thing about that." A beat of silence. Something moved behind Rourke's eyes. "You don't have the resources to fight Fitch," Rourke said. He shifted his weight. "I'm offering you a civil resolution. Walk away. He'll compensate you fair." "What he'll compensate me," August said, "is nothing, because in 2 weeks the documentation we've assembled travels to Denver, where it will be reviewed by a federal land commissioner who has been specifically watching Fitch's acquisition pattern for the past 18 months. I know this because I wrote to him 4 days ago." This was a gamble. It was also true. Rourke was still. "You want to take this cabin," August said. "You come back with jurisdiction, a federal marshal, and a better forgery. Until then, you're standing on my property without invitation." Rourke's eyes went to Nora again. She did not move. She held his gaze the way she had held it on the auction platform, unblinking, jaw set, completely, permanently unintimidated. She reached into the stack of papers on the table and held up, facing outward so Rourke could read it clearly, the journal entry from March 3rd, 1869. Rourke read it. His face changed. He was a man who operated through the assumption that those he targeted did not have the tools to fight back. The woman he had tried to sell, the one everyone in Cripple Creek called the deaf girl, the one they thought was nothing, had just shown him, without a word, that she had been 3 steps ahead of him for weeks. "Leave," August said quietly, "while the road's still passable." Rourke left. He rode down the ridge without looking back, the wind cutting hard across the open face above the tree line, his horse's breath coming in great white bursts. August turned back inside. Nora was sitting. She had set the journal entry back in its place. She was looking at the stove. The strength in that moment was not what the crowd at the Meridian Saloon would have recognized as strength. It was not the strength of men with guns, or men with badges, or men who make the rules. It was the other kind, the kind that is actually harder to cultivate. The willingness to stand, clear-eyed and prepared, between the thing that wants to destroy you and the life you are still building. August sat down beside her. He put his hand very gently over hers. She turned her hand over and held it. March came slowly. The snow on the south-facing bench began to soften by midday, pulling back from the base of the spruce trees to reveal the first dark earth of the season. Nora found a colony of snowdrops at the edge of the woodpile. Cord's plantings, she realized, reading his spring journal entries. Put the snowdrops in the east corner. Fool's optimism. But the fool persists. She showed August the entry. He read it. Something crossed his face. The specific grief of reading the small, ordinary notes of a dead friend. He closed the journal and set it back on the shelf. That evening he sat for a long time at the south window. Nora came and stood beside him. Below the ridge, the valley was still white, the creek a dark line threading between snow-covered banks. Above the valley, the ridgeline was pure blue shadow going violet as the light changed. After a while, August took his notebook from his coat pocket. Not Cord's journals, but his own, a battered field book he had carried since the war, and wrote something. He held it up. "I don't know how to do this, whatever this is." Nora took the pencil from him. She wrote beneath it, "Neither do I. So that makes it fair." August looked at what she had written for a long time. He wrote, "The Land Commissioner's review comes back in 6 weeks. If the deed holds, and it will hold, this place is ours. I mean that as a legal statement, but I also mean it the other way." Nora read it. She read it a second time. She wrote, "When you say ours," she stopped, crossed it out, started again. "I want to be useful here. I want to be here because I am useful, not because I have nowhere else to go." August looked at the words. He reached over and, with one line, crossed out, "Not because I have nowhere else to go." He looked at her. "Because you want to be," he wrote. "That is the only sufficient reason. For anything." Outside, the light was almost gone. The first star appeared above the ridge, sharp, cold, enormous in the high-altitude sky. In the stove, the fire spoke in small, familiar ticks. This was not the end of their difficulty. The Federal Review would take time. Fitch was not a man who accepted the first loss. Rourke still wore a star. The spring would bring survey crews and railroad agents, and the general resumption of all the forces that wanted this land. None of that was resolved. But in the cabin on the ridge, in the last of the February light, there was a particular quality of stillness. The stillness of two people who have independently survived the worst and have arrived unexpectedly at the same table. Home is not a place on any map. Home is not granted by a deed or a judge or a sheriff's jurisdiction. Home is the specific person who says, "I see you." Not the version of you that is useful or quiet or convenient, but the full version, the one you have been carrying alone. Home is the moment someone holds out their hand for that weight, and you let them take some of it. Was what was building between them strong enough to hold against everything the valley below was about to send up the ridge? Stay with me. The story is just beginning. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded that stories travel in ways we never expect. Someone in a city I've never seen, awake at midnight, hears this. And for a moment, we're in the same cabin, at the same stove. Where in the world are you hearing this tonight? If you still believe that the right person shows up when you've stopped expecting them, this next story is for you. Don't leave.